Good afternoon and assalamu alaikum from me, Moazzam Begg, here in Birmingham in the United Kingdom of Great Britain. I'm a former prisoner of the United States at Guantanamo. I was held there by the US military for 3 years without charge or trial. I am currently the outreach director of the campaign and advocacy group CAGE that campaigns against policies and abuses within the war on terrorism. And what I wanted to tell you about this, of course, it's really important, particularly at this time while Palestine is on the mind of many people and the convulsions that are taking place there that are affecting everyone in one way or the other. And it would be remiss of me not to mention the connection, and that connection is that the targeting or listing of Muslims in particular as terrorism suspects or people who are prone to extremism and terrorism isn't something that just began with 9/11. In fact, if you look at Palestine, for example, every single resistance movement that's existed there, whether they are nationalist, whether they are democratic, whether they are socialist, or whether they are Islamic or Islamist, all have been designated by the United States, by Europe, and indeed Israel as terrorist entities. And it is this ability or this desire to not recognize the humanity of the Muslims, in particular in this war on terrorism, that has fed into this perpetual us and them narrative. And one of the things that I came across, of course, in Guantanamo, in Bagram, in Kandahar, all of these places where I was held as a prisoner by the US, was this notion, was this connection by many American soldiers, many of whom had never left their states, their individual states, let alone traveled to Afghanistan, a place that would have been hard at that time for them to identify on the map, to occupy that land, and then to bring in prisoners from all over the world, and then to interrogate them based upon a standard that the United States was still developing. And in the midst of that, whilst we were held and labeled as primarily enemy aliens, after which we were called enemy combatants, who were not subjected to or did not have the rights and afforded under the Geneva Conventions, that it was easy, very easy, in fact, to dehumanize us, to belittle us, to cruelly, inhumanely, and degradingly abuse us, to torture us, and in some cases that I witnessed myself, to murder us. Now, the war on terrorism and Guantanamo, of course, is one nasty byproduct of that war that began in Afghanistan, and I would argue continues to this day in various manifestations in different parts of the Muslim world, whether it's in Libya or Syria or Iraq and so forth. We know what happened after the invasion of Afghanistan and what led to the invasion of Iraq connected to Afghanistan. There are two things I just wanted to say about that. One is I was held by the CIA and questioned by them in the Bagram detention facility in Afghanistan. And they said to me that if you don't cooperate, we will do to you what we did to a man called Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi. Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi had been brought into Bagram. He'd been interrogated there and then sent alive in a coffin to a ship in the Persian Gulf called the USS Bataan. From there, he was sent to Egypt. And in Egypt, he was tortured into giving what's now infamously the false confession that Saddam Hussein was working with Al-Qaeda to give them weapons of mass destruction. That information was passed over by the CIA to Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, who presented it to the United Nations Security Council as credible evidence, and it became one of the major justifications for the invasion of Iraq. When the invasion of Iraq happened, Al-Qaeda did not exist in that country, and there were no weapons of mass destruction. Shortly after that, after the abuses in Abu Ghraib, in Camp Booker, and so forth, eventually Al-Qaeda did come into Iraq. And when it came into Iraq, it met with, in the prison camps of Abu Ghraib and Camp Booker, members of Saddam Hussein's fallen Ba'athist government. And within these dungeons, they formulated a group called Islamic State in Iraq. That group later went on to become Islamic State in Iraq and Sham, ISIS, and eventually just Islamic State. And the cycle of violence, the creation of violence, was so evident. 17 members of the leadership of ISIS had been prisoners in Camp Booker. When General Jeffrey Miller, the US commander of Guantanamo, when I met him very briefly when I was held in solitary confinement in Guantanamo, finished his tour and leadership of Guantanamo, he was redeployed to Abu Ghraib. And in Abu Ghraib, during his tenure as leader of that prison camp, the infamous naked prisoner pyramids and torture that happened in Abu Ghraib happened under his watch. And as a result of that dehumanization that was later spread in knowledge and experience to ordinary Iraqis, who then went on to tell the rest of the world about what the Americans had done, was a catalyst for the continuance of violence. That had happened, of course, in Afghanistan too. But unlike Abu Ghraib, the pictures and the images didn't come out. In fact, later in several years under Obama, images and pictures of women, Muslim women, being raped by American soldiers and sexually abused were blocked. The publication was blocked. That I think had been sought by the Associated Press to see those images, because Obama said that it would harm American troops on the ground, and the damage, of course, was already done. Bringing this back then now to Guantanamo, it's important that we understand. I began with Palestine, and I want to just say that one of the most well-known, probably the most well-known prisoner today in Guantanamo, out of 779 prisoners, of whom now there are only 40 left. This prisoner's name is Abu Zubaydah. His real name is Zain al-Abidin, Muhammad Zain al-Abidin, and he was touted in the beginning as the most high-ranking member of Al-Qaeda in custody, and was supposedly one of Osama bin Laden's right-hand men. After a series of torture programs he underwent, including in a place called the Cat's Eye prison, which was a torture center, which was in Thailand, and was run at that time by somebody who went on to become the head of the CIA, Gina Haspel. Abu Zubaydah was waterboarded over 80 times. And waterboarding, I'm sure most of you would have come across this term, has nothing to do with water sports. It's had everything to do with torture. In Spanish, it's called tortura del agua. It was used during the Spanish Inquisition first, ironically, against Muslims and Jews by the Reconquista of Ferdinand and Isabella and their Catholic movement. And it has been used subsequently throughout history by the Japanese, ironically, against American GIs, by the Vietnamese, by British soldiers against the IRA, by the Nazis against French resistance, and by ISIS against some of their captives. And so the United States torture program was designed for Abu Zubaydah. The psychologists, the psychiatrists designed the enhanced interrogation techniques, used them on him, and then they used them on others. Abu Zubaydah was placed in different detention camps or interrogation camps in 3 European countries, including Lithuania, Poland, and Romania. The torture that he faced in those countries was so severe that a judge from the European Court ordered every one of these countries to give Abu Zubaydah a special victim status and to compensate him, even though he remains imprisoned in Guantanamo without charge or trial. And every single allegation about him being a member of Al Qaeda or being Osama bin Laden's right hand man has fallen apart to the point at which, almost after 20 years being held without charge or trial, he is not even designated for trial by military commission, a system that allows for hearsay evidence, a system where there is no proper, meaningful defense that you can appoint yourself, a system that it's all but derives from the jumps of the kangaroo court. And it's important that I make that connection back, because Abu Zubaydah may have been many things. He may have supported and helped to get people trained to go and fight against the occupation in Palestine or Kashmir and so forth. But what he categorically was not, that we know now, was a part of Al Qaeda or part of that atrocity carried out against the United States on 9/11. So what we're left with is, currently, there are still 40 prisoners in Guantanamo. Amongst them are those that are regarded as forever prisoners. And again, that's something that's shocking, because how do you have, in a system like the United States of America that believes in the rule of law, that believes in the concept of innocent until proven guilty, that believes in due process, how do you have a place like Guantanamo where you have 26 of those 40 prisoners designated as forever prisoners, meaning too innocent to charge and too dangerous to release? That doesn't make any logical sense, especially considering they have been interrogated and questioned by the world's most powerful law enforcement agencies. There are six or so, I think there are now 9 prisoners who have been cleared for release. So even in Guantanamo, you may be cleared for release, but that does not mean release. It does not mean that you will get freedom. It does not mean that you will end this abuse that you faced. And then, of course, there are a handful, other than those numbers I've mentioned, who are supposed to be the big numbers, the high value prisoners, including those accused of the actual support of, or the masterminds of 9/11. Guantanamo has been a very dark stain on the United States of America and what it means and how it sees itself, and it is still open. It is a bipartisan project. It has lasted for 20 years. It has outlasted 4 US presidents, and it is still there. The fact that it hasn't closed, and the fact that the newest president of the United States of America still hasn't said that it will be closed, is a lasting and continuing shame on the United States of America. And so it is my call, and the call of most ordinary people around the world, to close this subject, to close this chapter. To close this chapter, those prisoners must be resettled to places where they are safe and they will not be re-imprisoned or retargeted and persecuted. They must be adequately compensated so that they can restart and rebuild their lives. Those that have been designated as forever prisoners must have this label removed from them, and they must be sent either back to their homes or to places where they can rebuild their lives. Those prisoners who've been sent, like some about 20 or so who have been sent to the United Arab Emirates, only to be re-tortured, re-imprisoned, and re-traumatized, their trauma and their ordeal must end. The United States must be part of a process that offers redress and reparation to all of the prisoners that it abused. And finally, those who are part of the military commissions process should be placed in a place where justice can be done and seen to be done in a normative judicial process. And with that, if we can bring that to an end, we can bring this chapter of Guantanamo to an end. Thank you very much for listening.